Greetings and welcome to episode 14 of the Sustaining the Herd podcast, brought to you by Settje Agri-Services and Engineering of Raymond, Nebraska. I'm Andrew Wadle, and I'm joined by my co-host, Brock Vitek. And in addition to Brock and I in the studio today, we are joined by Travis Caspersen, who is the Sales and Compliance Lead at Settje Agri-Services, and as well as Nick Maaske, who's the Nutrient Management Plan Specialist at Settje Agri-Services and Engineering. And as the old saying goes, Nick and Travis are back by popular demand. In one of the earlier episodes of Sustaining the Herd, Travis and Nick met with us and talked about nutrient management planning. And today the topic is going to be permitting, and it's really this episode is a logical progression from nutrient management planning, just knowing that the two go hand in hand. So in a moment, we're going to have Nick and Travis reintroduce themselves to you. But just for our new listeners, welcome to Sustaining the Herd. And, what is Sustaining the Herd? Well, Sustaining the Herd is an opportunity for us to talk with producers, people in town, so to speak, industry people, really on everything involving sustainability in animal agriculture. And what is sustainability at Settje? Well, sustainability is environmental sustainability. That is keeping our air and our water clean. We all want that. Sustainability is utilizing our resources, getting the most out of what we put in. And it involves caring for animals and things like that. And then ultimately, financial sustainability is important too, because in order to have a healthy industry, we have to have healthy businesses. And so whether you're in production agriculture or, as we like to say, a person from town who is a consumer of agricultural products, we hope that you find this interesting and enjoyable, and that you walk away with an appreciation for the fact that agriculture is the ultimate recycling system. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nick and Travis, and please reintroduce yourselves to our guests.
I'm Nick Maaske. I'm an agronomist by trade. I went to school at UNL. Been at Settje since 2008, kind of learning nutrient management plans as I went, working with compliance and everything else that goes along with that.
Yeah, and I'm Travis Caspersen. I'm from Central Nebraska. Graduated from the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, and in February I will have been with Settje for 20 years.
Outstanding.
And just as an icebreaker, guys, Nick, Travis, what do you guys like to do when you're not permitting animal facilities and involved in nutrient management planning?
I do a lot with my family. My kids are just getting grown up and getting them off on their own. We do a lot of work around our house. As you can see, I got a lot of plants in the background. Kind of one of my hot buttons. We got a big garden and a bunch of native plants and stuff around our house. But that's primarily I focus. Of course, I like sports and try to get out and hunt a couple times a year as well.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I'd say a lot of the same. It's we're pretty active family, sports, showing calves, agriculture. I just become recently an empty nester, so I'm learning to do a lot of the chores that I haven't previously had to do. But yeah, just enjoying time with the kids.
Excellent.
Great. Let's dive into it, guys. So to start off, I'd like to ask, what are zoning and permitting, and why do they exist? As well as what are the different jurisdictions, whether it be local, state, or federal, in which the zoning and permitting exist?
Well, I can start. Really, when a facility looks at permitting, and they reach out to us or however they come about, the first question that I always ask them is where they at with zoning. Permitting, we kind of know what needs to be done. The state, federal regulations are out there, and we have to follow those. But each county is different, and some counties don't have zoning, some counties do. But every county is different as far as the setbacks. And so when someone reaches out about the process, zoning is where we always start. And once we get approved through zoning, if need be, then the second step will be with the permitting with that particular state.
Yeah, your local government is always where you start. If you're close to a town, you gotta follow their rules. If you're just within a county, you follow the county rules, and then just work up from there. A couple of the other states go by township; they have some special rules. It just works its way from the smaller government up to the bigger government. It gets a little more straightforward as you get bigger. It gets a little more consistent as you get to the bigger, like to the federal and state permits.
So you mentioned setbacks, Travis, and can you go into a little bit on why they exist?
So the setbacks really is just again, it's every county can be and most are separate, different. And when we look at setbacks, it's for the most time it's to residences or to local businesses, cemeteries, parks, stuff like that. But there is a setback, and the one that normally hits most people is to different residences that would be out there. And it could be different from north, south, east, west. But that's the first thing that we look at is, can they meet a setback from neighbors? And if they can't, then can we get an impact easement from the neighbor? And that's in counties that require it. If they don't require it, then we don't have to worry about it. And not all states require it. Some of them have setbacks that the state handles. But in those counties that have a setback, have zoning, that's usually the first thing we look at is their setbacks from, in particular, neighbors.
Right. And just to be clear, that when we speak of setbacks, that would be the distance. That is a distance from point A to point B. In that distance, which something is not allowed to happen or allowed to happen.
That's correct. That's correct. And it can work both ways. If someone wants to put in a new house, there's also setback from a particular livestock operation in a lot of cases. So it does work both ways.
Right. Nick, what do you see in terms of what's different in across different state jurisdictions?
Well, we primarily work in Nebraska. In Nebraska, it works from your local government up. States like Iowa and Kansas kind of have a statewide zoning. It works. They have particular setbacks for each category. A few of them have a few independent counties. I think Iowa has a few independent counties that have their own zoning. But and then South Dakota is very similar to Nebraska. Works from your local up. But yeah, they definitely vary from state to state, county to county.
Excellent. So who needs to go through the zoning and permitting process?
It really depends, again, on every county and every state. I would say for the most part, if you're 300, and I'm just talking strictly on cattle here, but we have to look at each species. But if you're going into the medium category, I would say you need to look at zoning and make sure that you have your zoning in hand. And as far as that goes, that would also be the same as far as state permitting. When you're a small, you don't really need to go through anything. But once you get into that medium category, that's where you really need to start looking at the permitting process, both from a county, state, and federal.
And just go through that distinction between small, medium, and large when it comes to size.
Yeah, and again, every species is different. But
let's talk beef cattle. Say
in beef cattle, so it'd be 0 to 299 would be a small. Don't need to do anything. 300 to 999 would be a medium, and 999 and above would be a large. And that's really across the board on that as far as state to state. That's a federal, and so every county would be that. And so at that point in time, if you are that size and you want to continue to feed, you need to do a request for inspection and have them come out and look at you. And they'll tell you if controls are required or not. And if you get into a large category, it becomes a little bit more detailed, a little more thorough. But at that point, that's where the state will make that determination whether controls are required or not.
Travis, when it comes to the facility size distinction, I know you talked about it for purposes of state permitting. At the county level, are there any facility size classes or groups that we have to look at as well?
Yeah, every county's different, and so they'll break up that class separate. It could be 0 to 1,000 is class 1, 1,000 to say 2,500 is class 2, and et cetera. But every county is different as far as what that determination is, both on size and on distance. So, I keep saying it, but it really is a county by county issue as far as looking into it.
But most of the counties, the 300 head threshold is pretty similar across most of the counties when they start categorizing you as a feeding operation. And another thing on the size too, just because you're under 300 doesn't mean you're completely safe. I mean, no one's allowed to discharge into the water of the U.S. or be a threat to the environment. So they can also force you to have a request for inspection depending on if they get a complaint or see a threat, I guess. Wanted to add that.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to add, guys, because, one of the things is, why do we need permitting in the first place? And it's to protect the air and the water that we breathe. And I think we just need to accept it for what it is. There's been times in history in certain locations of the country where oftentimes the facilities grew so large, so fast, so unregulated that they did cause some environmental concerns and really diminish property values, et cetera. And so a lot of what we're talking about today is really hopefully a healthy balance between what society desires and what producers desire to do.
Yeah, because I'll add into what Nick is saying. A facility that's less than 300 head could still have controls required. But a facility that's over 1,000 head doesn't mean that they have controls required. We have facilities that are 5, even 10,000 head that have exemptions. And so they just have no potential to discharge. And so it doesn't mean that if you're a 10,000 head yard that you will have to put in a holding pond. It is a case by case determination by the state at the state level. And that's really what the requirement is to have them out and they'll make that determination. But as a whole, most smalls are exempt. Most mediums are exempt and most larges have a permit.
Right. Great. Well, that's true. And Nick, you really raised a good point that nobody is allowed to discharge manure or effluent to waters of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And so, could you guys walk through the process for an expansion or modification of an existing facility and the construction of a new facility?
Yeah. So if someone would reach out to our team and say they want to do an expansion, the first thing we do is we go out there and look at their site, help them walk through that process, everything that they need to apply for, both at a county, state level. Look at the area that they want to expand, make sure it makes sense. If it doesn't, let's look at another spot, and that starts the ball rolling. Usually at that point, I'd sit down with Nick and we'd start looking at the county regulations, making sure that if there's neighbors that are in that area, the setback, where do they sit? If it's neighbors that are in the setback, then we need to get a waiver or impact easement from them. And so just because someone is in your setback, that doesn't mean that you can't build. You just may need to get their approval, get them to sign off on it. So I normally work with Nick on that to get that going. Once we kind of go through the county, then we'll start with the state permit. But we will always do the county permit first. Nick, you.
And to start that state permit off, you would do that request for inspection that we talked about earlier. You do that for an expanding and a new operation as well. So you would have you would send in the form, let them know that you're thinking about expanding. DE inspector or whatever state inspector will come out, look at it. You tell them kind of what you're going to do, just verbally, kind of go over a game plan, and then they'll come back and write a letter and say, yes, if you're going to do this expansion, you're going to need to submit an application to the state and have them review it and approve it before you can build that expansion. That's for previously permitted facilities.
Guys, I'm curious. We've talked about county and state level, and a lot of times I know we'll talk about permit at the state level, especially. For our listeners who may not be as familiar with the process, could you break it down a bit further at the county level to differentiate between county zoning, and county permitting with things such as a conditional use permit? I think that can sometimes blend together for people who aren't as familiar with the process. And I'm sure that's different for each county once again.
Yeah. So a conditional use permit is really if you're an existing facility and you've been out there operating prior to they had zoning and you have not done anything, you're just kind of grandfathered in. But if you go and want to do an expansion or someone that's new, that's where a conditional use permit application is required. And so that's what you're submitting is a CUP to get the ball rolling. And that application goes in. That's where, like I said, we need to meet the setbacks. And it's just not setbacks. There's a number of other things. Some of them have a matrix, but there's other things you've got to have to apply on that CUP. But once that process has been applied for, in most counties will have a zoning board, and then they'll have a commissioners. So we initially go in front of the zoning board and explain everything. They'll vote on it, and they will do whether or not they don't vote to approve, but they vote to recommend. So they'll either recommend it or not recommend it by their vote. And then it'll go to the commissioners who have the final say. And the commissioners will do the same thing, same process, just a different day, and they'll make that determination by a vote.
Travis, how often do the commissioners depart from the recommendation?
Not very often, but sometimes. We've actually had times where it's maybe a 5-0 in favor with the zoning, and we feel pretty good about ourselves, and we go into the commissioners, and it's reversed, and that's frustrating, and it's hard to get over that, but that's what happens. Now, it can work the other way if the zoning board does not necessarily give the approval, but then the commissioners actually can. I don't think we've ever had that happen, but we've had it the other way.
Another follow-up to that, I know we've talked about setbacks are in place for a reason, and we can't and shouldn't let manure or effluent into waters of the state or waters of the U.S. to protect the environment for all of the residents. Could you guys talk about the public input component at both the state and county level, whether that's local residents attending a zoning board meeting or county commissioners meeting, or also the public comment period, or maybe public hearings even for the state permitting, just to help people understand that the people in town and local residents do have an opportunity to give input when these projects come forward. Maybe even some stories.
Travis, I could talk at the state level. You probably have more experience at the county level. At the state level, the public comment period comes after an application is submitted to the state. The public is allowed 30 days to submit written comment to the DE, basically saying whether they like it, they don't like it, why it's wrong, or what's wrong with the application, or what's wrong with the location of the facility. And they really can't stop it at that point, as long as our application meets all the regulations in Title 130 and meets the Clean Water Act. They'll approve it. But then DE is required, though, to respond to each one of those comments. And they can kind of do them as groups or individual. But even if it's just an emotional, comment, they still are required to to respond to that. That's kind of at the state level.
Yeah, and at the county level, so the one thing I didn't talk about is usually there's language in there, and you got to look at that language. Some of them have shall, and some of them have may, and it's a big difference as far as that language. So if it's shall and you meet all the setbacks, then you will get your conditional use application. If it's may, then you may get your application. And that's where public comment really comes up to play into a factor. And believe me, I could tell you tons of stories and the emotion at some of these meetings, what they get into. And some of them, there's nobody shows up. And other times we have to move from the zoning board meeting into the courthouse because there's just so many people and the emotion that plays into it. Everybody wants a feedlot. They just don't want a feedlot down the road from them, right? And so that's what generally happens. It's okay if it's on the other part of the state or the part of the county, but when it's just down the road, I don't really like it. And so it really depends on the zoning administrator. And there's a ton of good zoning administrators. There's a ton of good board members and commissioners. But it's a lot of pressure on them because it is local and it's people that they see at ball games and in town, and it's neighbors, it's friends, and they're against it, and they're showing up at these meetings. And so it is it becomes a lot of times very public and very emotional. And that's where I always recommend anytime a customer that we're working with, they need to also bring in people that show that they're in favor, because a lot of times we're outnumbered by people against it. And so, but it does become very, very emotional at times.
And so, what are some of the things that some of the issues and difficulties that you see in some of these permitting and zoning situations, and or maybe another way to look at it as well as if someone is going into this process, how can they best prepare themselves to avoid those challenges?
The best thing you can do is be a good neighbor, right? And so just talk to your neighbors, and when you're spreading manure, use common sense as far as spreading. Don't be spreading a day before graduation or stockpiling, just certain things like that. And so be neighborly and make sure you're active in your community. Make sure you're active with the zoning, that the regulations when they have meetings, attend. But I guess that would be the biggest thing that I would say as far as what people can do to be out front in front of it. Nick?
Yeah, I agree with Travis. Yeah, having a good relationship with your neighbor, and you just don't want the first time you see them is at a zoning hearing, and you're expecting them to tolerate you putting in a bigger feedlot operation. You want to make sure that they know who you are, they know what you're trying to do, and they know that you're trying to do good for the community, whether it be helping the local economy or helping the tax levy. I mean, there is some good things about bringing in a bigger business, a bigger feeding operation. You just need to convince people of that. And then we also show them our plans to not impact the environment. We're going to have a contained feedlot and we're going to pump the holding pond onto, at agronomic rates on our fields. Proving all that helps with our argument of, hey, we're going to put this in. It's not going to impact the environment. Hopefully it'll help the economy, and hopefully it won't be a nuisance, all at the same time.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a matter of making a case that the facility, dairy, beef, or swine, is going to go in and not change anybody's quality of life, hopefully.
So a follow-up to that, guys, thinking maybe more on the positive side now, more fun to think about. Let's say, just an example here, I go and I build a brand new, or want to build a greenfield new 5,000 head feedlot here in Nebraska. However, I plan to scale that up to, let's say, 20,000 head over the next 5 to 10 years. And I know that will take a larger footprint than the initial pens that I'll have to hold 5,000. Are there any considerations to make during the process initially to set myself up for less headache down the road, maybe some work I could do up front to accommodate those future expansion or modification plans right now, instead of having to go back and do some of these things again?
Well, and I'll let Nick talk to state because we can do the permitting and make it easier down the road. But on a county, it's easier if we go and we apply for everything all at once. And some counties like that, some counties don't, because they want you to go and then come back. But I always try to push for let's get that footprint as large as we can the first time, and explain to the neighbors, this is what we're going to do. We're going to start here, but over time, maybe we've got kids coming back. We got something that we need to continue to grow, and so that's really what it is. It's getting and applying for it, starting with your existing footprint, but in putting in future expansion so that we don't have to go back through the board and go through that process again. And Nick could talk about it, but we're really do the same thing at the state permit.
Yeah, the only main difference between county and state is sometimes your county permits will expire, and you just got to be careful of that. Some of them are only good for, let's say, 3 or 5 years. You just have to be conscious of that. But at the state level, we can apply for what they call a phased construction and operating permit. So we'll apply for the very end, let's say 20,000 head at the end, and but we'll phase it in, adding basins and pins as we go. But you don't have to build, that doesn't ever expire. You just have to build it and certify it complete, and then you will have that for ongoing. It just never expires. So, but we definitely do a lot of that where we do a phased construction and operating permit. That way you can operate and feed part of your facility, start making money, and then build as you go. And you don't have to have everything complete to have your operating permit.
That's some really great insight. And, as I think about it, probably save some time and some headache of having to go back and do some of that again if we just take care of it up front, as well as maybe saving some money, I would imagine, not having to maybe hire an attorney or an engineering consulting firm like Settje every time you go back to do something. So I imagine there could be some benefits to doing that up front.
Yep, absolutely.
So it's clear that you guys both work together in permitting and compliance. And maybe this is more direct towards Nick, but how does the nutrient management plan then tie into the permitting process?
Well, the nutrient management plan is basically a manual of how you're supposed to run your waste management to comply with local, state, and federal regulations. It tells you exactly how to figure your manure application rates, how to manage your holding pond, how to manage emergencies. It gives you the whole outline of how to run your facility and stay within the regulations. And then it even has how to keep your records in the nutrient management plan. So basically what Travis does is he implements that. He does what it says in there. Do you agree with that, Travis? Yeah. You guys basically take it when I'm finished, you guys take it from there.
Yeah, Nick basically has a plan, and we help implement that plan. And so that's part of it is when you get any permitting, you first have a plan of what you say you're going to do or how you're going to handle it, but then you got to actually do it. And so the compliance really is doing that, is having records that show that you're doing what you're supposed to do.
So, gentlemen, as anaerobic digestion continues to grow in the livestock industry and become more common, are there any additional zoning and permitting requirements beyond what we've already discussed for livestock facilities that we need to think about for digesters? And Andrew, please feel free to jump into a guest seat and help answer here in your role as an agricultural engineer.
Okay, well, I'll start. As far as zoning, we've went through this a couple times already in a few counties, and it is so new that most counties do not have any verbiage in the regulations for it. Now we've made it fit, and so there's spot in there where it can fit, and so we have not had to go necessarily and do a whole lot of the zoning and permitting at this point yet. But as that becomes more prominent down the road, I can see that maybe they'll change the regulations. just so that it's covered in there. As far as permitting, I'll let Nick cover a little bit, but it is different. For the most part in the livestock sector, we deal with Title 130. This is Title 119. And so it's a different set of standards and regulations, and Nick, you can cover more of that.
Yeah, I mean, previously we did. I've done a few of these type of permits for like a truck wash that wants to do land application, or like a industrial composting facility that wants to do land application with their runoff water. This is going to be a little more complex than that, and it sounds like there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve at the state level as well, because they're not used to having these type of permits and land application. And you're right, Travis, they don't consider this the same as just manure from a feedlot. This is a different product in their eyes, and we have to do, bigger setbacks and residence setbacks and some different things that we normally don't have to do in the traditional animal section of the DE.
And Brock, I'll jump into the guest chair for a minute and say that the additional permitting that would typically not be thought of would be an industrial air permit as well as an industrial wastewater permit. And the reason for the air permit is, we've said many times that, anaerobic digesters aren't antimatter machines. In other words, if you put a pound of something in, you get a pound of it out. And so during the anaerobic transformation of things, we're producing methane gas, and then we're also producing the other constituents that come out of the raw biogas, and that's namely things like hydrogen sulfide, nitrous oxide, and things like that. And an industrial an air permit is required really for the purpose of just making sure that those constituents aren't at levels that are unacceptable to the states per their threshold. So you need an air permit as well as an industrial wastewater permit, which is really geared mostly towards the anaerobic digestion process, the receiving of manure, the tanks, the gas collection, etc. So those would be two permits that are generally required. That would be really outside of maybe the traditional scope of permitting. It could get more detailed than that even, because if you have a digester that's accepting some kind of a feedstock not related to manure, say for instance, glycerin or paunch, actually not paunch, take that back, glycerin or other substrates like maybe waste from a food processing plant, then you require additional permits as well. So
all of a sudden it starts to look like an industrial waste treatment facility, like you said.
Yeah.
Well, very informative, guys. Thanks for some great insight for that question. I'd like to change things up a bit now from how we normally do this, and give you, Nick and Travis, an opportunity to ask Andrew and I any questions you might have for us. Put us in the hot seat.
Well, I'd be curious, what's on the slate for the future? What type of guests are you guys looking to have on in the future?
That's a great question, Nick. And I think it really comes back to what I said kind of in our intro comments, and that is, what is sustainability to Settje? It's the air and the water. It's taking care of animals. It's financial sustainability. And so all of our future guests are kind of try to meet that theme. And so coming up, we actually have a producer, a cattleman that's going to come on and talk, and he will be, and hopefully there'll be more of those in the future. I think it would be great to have dairy producers, swine producers, et cetera, come on and talk about what they do, really where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. So that's one. We also have teed up people who are involved in some companies that are involved in the sustainability efforts at companies, and how they are their approach to sustainability and how it affects business decisions that then ultimately come back to the producers. We also have someone who's going to be talking about labor, working with Hispanic labor. we all know that immigration is a very, very hot topic in the U.S. right now. And the remarkable thing is, when you look at the food that we eat, that we're all going to have lunch here soon, it's amazing if we were to know just how much of that food is touched in some way by immigrant labor. And so it might be a little bit of an uncomfortable conversation, but we need to talk about what does immigration mean to agriculture. And so we're going to have someone come in, someone who's familiar with immigration and working with labor issues involving immigration. So that's just a little bit of it, Nick. But again, the whole idea of sustaining the herd is to hopefully be a one-stop shop for folks to come in and learn about everything sustainability, understanding that sustainability is not about just air and water. Air and water is really the thing that is kind of the go-to, but really we want to have a sustainable industry, and it's such a broad topic.
Perfect. Brock, I'll add into that. So if someone has a topic that they think would be good for this, or someone even wants to be a guest or has a guest that they think would be good, what should they do?
Great question, Travis. So they can go to our website that can either be accessed through sustainingtheherd.com, which routes to our Settje Agri-Services and Engineering website, or visit the Settje website if they're familiar, and go to the tab for the podcast, and they can find our contact information to reach out there and get connected with us. We would love to hear from people who have topic ideas, or if someone thinks that they would like to be a guest or know someone who'd be a good potential guest, we'd love to hear about that. The help is greatly appreciated.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because, in agriculture, we're a pretty low key crowd for the most part. And we're really not too awful good at self-promotion. And so, yeah, if you are someone who feels as though you have something to really get out there, we would be willing to consider everybody and anybody.
And I might add to that, I think a lot of people interact with or see our episodes posted on our Settje social media pages. So feel free as well, if it's easier, more convenient, just send a direct message to the Settje social media page if you see a post about the podcast, and our marketing team could get us connected to you that way as well, if you could share your phone or your email. So there's a few ways to reach us. Any other questions, guys?
I think I'm good.
Perfect. Well, thank you all very much for a really fun episode here. I think I speak for Andrew and I both when I say that this has been very insightful, and I think it's been an outstanding follow-up to our previous episode with you guys a while back when we talked about compliance and nutrient management. This really tied things together and just brought the big picture together to help our listeners understand what it not only looks like to remain in compliance with regulations, but how do you get a facility started, and what are all the steps to do that to make sure that you're doing it the way you're supposed to. We look forward to being back with all of our listeners here again in a couple of weeks. Until then, thanks for joining the herd today.